I thought for a moment, I'm going to resolve that last chord. That bothered me. Well, here we are. We find ourselves here one day before inaugurating our next president and his governing administration. We stand on the brink of, well, we don't really know what we stand on the brink of. And that's a problem for most of us. Many of us have difficulty adjusting to change, and we're even less adept at anticipating change when we don't know what those changes might bring. Anticipation is always stressful, even in situations when we know the outcome is likely to be wonderful. Most of us can recall how truly intolerable it once was to have to wait for some special occasion, like our birthday or Christmas or the next family vacation. I just want it to be here now. I can't stand waiting. Patience is a skill that we learn, yet rarely master. Waiting for things that are bad is even harder. I've had some experiences in life. I'm sure that none of you have ever had to take home a disappointing report card or spend an entire day in fear under the gloomy sentence of wait until your father gets home. That was from a different time and place, wasn't it? Impending doom is not a good feeling. Anticipation can be the best or the worst part of any occurrence, depending on how we approach what is yet to transpire. Because the outcomes are yet to be, our emotional responses to them are based partly, in fact, in expectation, but largely in our imagination. And facing the unknown provides a situation where owning an active imagination is not necessarily an asset. H.P. Lovecraft once said, "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown." This is particularly true when we have the creativity to imagine that all kinds of terrible things lurk in that unknown. Humankind has gone through great lengths to concoct explanations for those things we do not understand. Exhibit A here is most of the religions we have ever invented. We tend to like to keep our lives and the things we care about under control, or at least somewhat managed and predictable. I am keenly aware of how concerned some of us in this room are today. There are many challenges facing our current world order, and in most of our minds, they will all be exacerbated by another Trump presidency. If we feel that we're standing at the edge of a precipice today, it's largely because we have no real idea of how the incoming government will change our nation, our lives, and the well-being of ourselves, our loved ones, and everyone else that comes under its influence. It's not just that the incoming administration was not preferred by most of us, or that it proposes some policies that might offend our civic sensibilities. We've been there before. I can recall feeling a huge disappointment when Ronald Reagan gained office with his ultra-conservative agenda and the backing of the moral majority. I recall being intensely angry when the Supreme Court ruled that all the hanging chads in Florida must have been votes for Bush 2 and not for Gore. In these and similar elections, I felt a setback to my own agenda but never did I feel a fundamental loss. I didn't know Greg was that quick. I trusted that in spite of political differences, the nation would still persevere. And I could hope that the next election might swing the pendulum back in a way more comfortable to my own sensibilities. And it usually did. This time feels different even from the first Trump presidency. In 2016, even Donald Trump was surprised that he won. And he and his people were not at all prepared to run a nation. This time around, we just don't know what will transpire. He has consolidated personal power through judicial appointments, legislative majorities, and a culture of personal fealty among Republicans. And those who think of him and work to enact his will have had time to plan. Project 2024 is an obvious example. We know that Donald Trump can be vengeful, small-minded, and bent on revenge. We know that his primary loyalties are to himself, while also catering to fellow businessmen and billionaires. We know that he will manipulate fear, racial hatred, and xenophobic feeling to mobilize his political base. We know he is not beholden to the Constitution or to ideals of democracy. We know he will lie without pause, but we don't really know what he wants or what he will actually attempt to do once he does take office. Under Trump, our future is unknown and scarcely predictable. As Lovecraft suggested, this not knowing can and probably should elicit great fear. I will not even try to repeat the many scenarios I have heard about where this presidency might lead, about who may or may not be harmed or dispossessed in the process, and how its consequences might impact the world order. Because in truth, we don't know. So I stand here now, and I feel like I should be trying to soothe your fears and give you each a dose of hope to help you cope with your own fear. I feel I should inspire us to mobilize efforts to regain influence, maybe in 2026 or 2028. I feel I should be preparing you to help resist the most egregious harms the new order brings. But as I stand here now, I'm not really confident that I can do any of these things truthfully or effectively. But I do know we must try somehow to accomplish them all. We do need to meet our fears head on. The unknown is daunting, but it's where possibility lives as well. Somewhere I read that fear, F-E-A-R, has two meanings. One is forget everything and run, flee, and the other is face everything and rise. Forget everything and run, face everything and rise. I expect bad stuff will happen, but I also know that we need to remain alert and aware of what does transpire, and to analyze and evaluate it through the lens of our own values and principles, not the narrative that it's brought to us with. We come together here to reinforce a value-based morality and to work our hardest to see it become manifest in ourselves and in our world. We need to keep these values alive and in the front of our mind, our children's minds, and everyone's minds. We saw how readily deep principles could be trivialized in common speech through devices like turning the word woke into a pejorative, following the same pattern that demeaned political correctness as being PC. or whining about the overreaches of the nanny state. We should always honor what is good and be ready to stand up for it, even if some old grade school mentality thinks of it as being too goody-goody. Diversity, equality, and inclusion are good. Science and knowledge are good. Caring and compassion are good. Our job is to remind everyone we can that people who feel threatened by what is good are fundamentally in the wrong. I felt deeply betrayed by my fellow Americans last November, and I really don't comprehend still why things turned out the way they did. I know that some voters will always be angry, some voters will always be greedy, some voters will always be afraid, and that too many are gullible and susceptible to exploitative negative advertising. I also know that almost as many people did not vote at all, pretty much the same number as those who voted for each of the other two candidates. We tend to think of them as apathetic, and they might be, but it's just as likely that they are fully disaffected and believe that neither candidate offers them a suitable solution. We need to empower these people, give them a sense of mission. Our task as the Trump presidency unfolds will be to find ways to demonstrate that what the government does or doesn't do matters in all of our lives. We need to find ways to illustrate the consequences of policy decisions. And this is really a hard thing to do. Teaching and didacticism don't take well, and righteous indignation just gets way too close to name calling. But more folks must become aware of the perils and costs of this agenda. The president holds the bully pulpit and will tell people what he wants them to hear. We must find other paths and whatever else it entails, so we know that truth-telling and speaking up must be a big part of it. Not so much by directing vindictive against Trump and his appointed agents, but by simply observing and describing accurately what does cause harm. Our job is to regain some authority in creating a new narrative about American life and values. Somehow we need to explain that rights and freedoms of all Americans are at risk and to demonstrate how real this problem is. Think of how successful the National Rifle Association was with the claim that we were after people's Second Amendment rights. People respond to the threat that something of theirs is at risk of being taken or lost. We need to work into that narrative so they fear different kinds of losses. Now, I'm pretty much an optimist overall. I want to believe in people. And I believe that most people want what is good and right, at least for themselves and those they love. That's why I can do this job I do. I seek to help people find their inner good. I believe that much in our government system is broken, and that money and power and fear now hold more influence than I would render healthy. Somehow we must find ways to bring voice to the people. We, the people, are empowered by the Constitution. We are the moral force behind all of our foundational laws and are really the only path to regaining or gaining a democratic nation. The threat that we might lose our freedoms to an authoritarian state is real, but only if we allow it to occur. I'm not by nature a political animal, and I try to shy away from confrontation and power fights. I far prefer to till the fields of our shared interests and feelings and explore how we can feed our spirit and build our common humanity. And I know that many of you hold similar inclinations. But complacency is not a viable response to many of the changes impending. Sitting back is responding to fear with the forget everything and run strategy. What we need is heightened awareness and vigilance to changes that transpire in our government. I know that when I was a youth, when I was traveling the country, I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I was intimidated by a big wrought iron banner over the gate that said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom." Because at the time I thought they were being vigilant against me. But now I know there's truth in that claim. We must face everything and rise to the occasions that encroach on the rights and natural values of ourselves and our fellow residents. We can and must provide witness and opposition to injustices when they occur. We must be prepared to act, hopefully with wisdom and in safety, as actions are called for. By standing up for human decency and civil rights, we should be able to become a countervailing force to present trends. Hopefully the force that pulls the pendulum back in our direction. I have never doubted that the arc of history bends towards justice because I believe that we are smart enough to eventually learn what is in our best interest. This is the foundation of my sense of hope for all of us. But do note that I claim we should have hope, we should hold hope, and we should act on our hopes. As our human goodness is being tested, let us to resolve to work ever harder to refine and develop all the values we hold and continue our work towards beloved community and a just society. Tomorrow is Inauguration Day, and it's also the day we set aside to honor the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Let us pay close attention to the news as our next president begins to implement his plan for our nation. But let us do so in the spirit of peace, justice, and shared humanity, as was shown through the life and spirit of Dr. King. And I know that deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Amen, and blessed be.